Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my start-sit decisions for the early Week 9 games. I will be changing some of my opinions as the week goes on as I look more in depth on some of the stats. I will give you my final rankings at every position, so stay tuned throughout the week, and especially on Saturday when I update all those takes. But let's get into it. No time to waste. These are the 4 teams on bye and all of their matchup stats. Overall, there's a lot of neutral average matchups that we're missing, so not that big of a deal, especially at wide receiver. All of those matchups are middle of the pack. And then the Bucks rank middle of the pack on everything. So not too bad overall. There are 4 good matchups, though. The Jets and Eagles are good matchups for quarterbacks and running backs. But there are 2 bottom 3 matchups that we avoid for the running back position with Cleveland out, and also for tight ends, given the Eagles are inactive. So overall, those are the 4 teams you cannot start: the Browns, the Jets, the Eagles, and the Bucks. And the matchups we kind of catch a break. Nothing elite is missing. So let's move on to the first matchup of the week: the Ravens at the Dolphins. For the Ravens, Lamar Jackson is expected to play, so that's a no-brainer. You're obviously starting him. He also gets a top 10 matchup, so the quarterback we drafted in the top 2 at the position should be lights out. A must start in Week 9. Derrick Henry did play somewhat well without Lamar Jackson in his last 2 games, so I would consider him a must start. The Dolphins rank as a top 6 matchup, so Henry should get a big upgrade and should have a great game. Although they did lock down Bijan Robinson last week, I'm not a believer that Miami is actually a matchup to fear. For the Dolphins, we are always starting Devon Achane. He is a lock in the lineup matchup proof. However, he gets a positive matchup, so he should be even better in this game. The Ravens rank top 4 against the position, a lot of points allowed on the year. So I would 100% be starting Devon Achane, no doubt about it. And I think Jalen Waddle is a good start this week. With Darren Waller on IR, Waddle's target share is pretty much guaranteed, and the Ravens have really struggled this season at stopping opposing wide receivers. So even though they got healthier last week and played a bit better off the bye, Rome Odunze still really played well, and I would expect at least garbage time and good game script to save you with Waddle. So a top 2 matchup, I definitely will be ranking Waddle in the top 20. He's a must start, in my opinion, this week. So I would start those 4 players. Now let's move on to the flex plays in this game, where in general, you're not always convinced if you should start or bench Zay Flowers. He's a big boom bust option. However, this season, he's consistently been putting up 70 plus yards. So typically the floor has been safe enough this year to keep him in the lineup. But why I'm not automatically starting him just a flex play this week is because the matchup does rank bottom 2. I think game script is the main reason why the Dolphins are so good at stopping opposing wide receivers. Generally, most teams torch them and have the lead. You don't have to pass as much in that scenario. So maybe their corners are just players I'm overlooking, but on paper, this is a massive downgrade for Zay Flowers. I only think he's an average flex play, not a must start this week. But with Lamar Jackson coming back, I do feel more confident in Mark Andrews. The matchup for him does rank top 10. So although he's been a bit up and down, much more consistent when Lamar's been the quarterback, and I do feel like he still has very high upside. So I would like to tell you to start him, but given last week and some of these games with only 20 yards are really disappointing, I think he's just in the flex conversation. I don't think rest of season Andrews is a lock in the top 10. The position's actually very deep this year, and despite a good matchup, I don't feel like he will automatically be ranked in my top 10, but I probably would still flex him. Probably a good streaming option for the most part. In Superflex, I do think Tua has value this week. The Ravens have been a very good matchup all year. Does rank top 8 entering the week, so I do consider Tua to have some streaming value. I'm not going to start him in a 1 quarterback league. The risk is too high. He can offer way too many turnovers to be viable, but last week they played really well against Atlanta. That was also a bad matchup. And on paper, on Thursday night against the Ravens, it is a good spot here. So I could see some upside, but he can always exit with a concussion and not finish the game, let alone the season. I still really fear trusting Tua. I'm probably not going to start him unless it's super flex. But with 4 teams on bye, including Jalen Hurts and Baker Mayfield, perhaps you need a backup option. I could argue Tua is one of the better streamers of the week. But an interesting name to pick up off the waiver wire would be Malik Washington, who I do think has flex value in this matchup. The Ravens have just been so good of a matchup this season, ranks top 2 in terms of fantasy points allowed. So there is somebody that has to step up. It just can't all go to Waddle and A-Chain. And this is a good matchup for him, so why not trust him to get another touchdown? He played well without Darren Waller, and given Waller is on IR, so is Tyreek Hill, there are very few other names to even consider. So Malik Washington, a name that might be on your bench soon, but probably reluctant to still start him. The matchup indicates, though, he gets a big enough upgrade where I will probably rank him in the flex conversation, but probably behind the start bubble. I probably don't rank him top 40, but probably top 45. However, given Tua and the Dolphins have been really hard to trust this year, a lot of turnovers from their offense, I do consider the Ravens to have some appeal in this matchup. Not safe enough to fully trust, but a little more tempting. And in the flex conversation, more of a streaming option, but probably someone I would still keep on the wire. They've had no floor. You could still get a negative against Miami, but a little more interesting this week. It's a bit more appealing. Players I'm benching, though, definitely include Darren Waller. He's on IR, so definitely can't start him. He's not even healthy. But with Lamar Jackson available, I'm not going to start the Dolphins defense. Even against bad teams, there's no chance in hell I'm trusting the Dolphins defense. But given the matchup is terrible for Rashad Bateman against receivers, I'm not going to start him. I'm also not going to trust DeAndre Hopkins. He needs a touchdown, and even without it, it might be his only catch on the game. So that's very risky. And then although Justice Hill does factor in sometimes, not enough for me to trust, I would be benching Justice Hill, but not the worst handcuff you could roster. Does have some value if Henry goes down. But up to this point, Isaiah Likely has not been a safe play at all, so not going to start him. He did run more routes last week, but until he actually has a good game, cannot argue he's worth starting. The matchup's top 10, but I think it's wasted on him. If anything, I'm only trusting Andrews at tight end. But then for the Dolphins, I offer a long shot for every team, and I do consider Ollie Gordon to be a little more interesting. I did like what I saw from him last week, but needs a touchdown, very unlikely to happen. I'd probably be benching the backup Dolphins running back. But the matchup on paper is top 5. I would upgrade him a little compared to where I'd typically rank Ollie Gordon. I also think Keaton Mitchell has some upside. I could see some garbage time in the fourth quarter. And Keaton Mitchell did have some explosive runs last week. He does have upside, but without that house call, you will get screwed. So those are my start sits for the Ravens at the Dolphins. Now let's move on to the Chicago Bears at the Bengals. The most obvious no-brainer would be Jamar Chase. Lock in your lineup, definitely a top 5 wide receiver. Now that Joe Flacco's there, it's very safe to bet on Jamar. But the main reason I'm trusting T. Higgins is not the touchdown production he's offered. It's the matchup. The Bears rank as a top 11 spot, and I trust that Flacco will be throwing multiple touchdowns. He did score last week, but the volume wasn't quite there. There is some risk still with T. Higgins, but in good matchups, I want to trust him. Given the Bears rank top 11, I would assume that T is a safe play. But the biggest upgrade for a Cincinnati Bengal this week would be for Chase Brown. The Bears' run defense has been a top 10 matchup this year. They have gotten much better since the bye, but still on the season they rank top 8. And Chase Brown has been hyper efficient the last 2 games. After averaging like 2 yards per carry, he's averaging like 9+ over the last 2 matchups. So he's looking more interesting at the moment. Still a rough bet for touchdowns, but given the matchup is good, I would assume he plays well enough to start. The running back position is a little bit thin outside the top 16 in general, so I'm probably going to rank him close to top 20. I think based on who else you have, I'd probably start Chase Brown after his last 2 games. But for the Bears, I think DeAndre Swift is still a must start. I did rank him a bit too high last week. He kind of let me down, but he still had a touchdown, still had double-digit fantasy points, and he still played very well in a good matchup last week. So in this matchup against the Bengals, it's literally the best you could ask for, and I might be ranking him top 5 again. I probably won't, given he let me down, but I'm tempted to put him top 10 because the upside he's offered since the bye has been phenomenal. This matchup, you want to start every running back you can against Cincinnati. They give up the most fantasy points overall to the position. So Swift is a confident start this week, and I have still not lost faith in Rome Odunze. Last week was a good bounce back, and the matchup against Cincinnati is solid. Not elite, but not terrible. He is clearly the go-to target, though, for Caleb Williams. And in general, I do trust him to put up top 20 numbers rest of season. The Ben Johnson wide receiver 1 is Rome Odunze, and that is a player I want in my lineup. But Caleb Williams is a player that's been wavering in my start territory, and I did rank him a bit too high last week. The floor, I think, is fine, but if it wasn't for this matchup, I would probably just put him as a flex option, more of a streamer, given his lack of upside as of late. He's not that accurate, and it's really just Ben Johnson's system that's carrying him. I like that he's not getting sacked as much, but the touchdowns aren't the safest bet to make, and it feels like the Bears are kind of pivoting towards a run-first offense. So Caleb, I think, is worth a start, but only because the Bengals rank as such a bad defense this year. It's a top 6 matchup for Caleb, and so I would upgrade him enough to probably start him yet again. But I'm a bit worried about it, not going to lie. I could see him burn you, but against Cincinnati, everyone plays well. I would still trust Caleb because Ben Johnson is his play caller. But at flex, DJ Moore gets not the best matchup, and in general, his floor has been very low, so not a player I'm dying to start. The touchdowns just aren't really available at a high rate in Chicago anymore. So if it's not Rome Odunze, I'm not dying to start a pass catcher, but obviously DJ Moore would be my next preferred option. You could do much worse than DJ Moore. But given the matchup is literally number 1 for opposing running backs, every running back plays well on Cincinnati, I do think Kyle Monangai has legit flex appeal in this game. I'm not totally sure what his volume is going to look like, but based on the matchup alone, I would expect some high upside for even the backup Bears running back against the Bengals. But where I'm really tempted is to start Colston Loveland. Every tight end has a good game against the Bengals. They've allowed 10 touchdowns to the position this year. That is by far the most you can find. Pretty much twice as much more in the second best matchup. So based on the production from Loveland this year, it's very hard to trust him. But last week, while Cole Kmet was out with a back injury, he did have 5 targets, and based on this matchup upgrade, you would consider him a very appealing streaming option against Cincinnati. It's similar to Mason Taylor last week. Betting on a touchdown is a pretty safe bet. So this could be the breakout game we've been waiting for Loveland, but given he's been so hard to trust, it's still a little bit difficult to actually be convinced he's worth it. But I will rank him top 15. Anyone going against Cincinnati gets a major upgrade. I would assume his floor is pretty high and the ceiling is elite against Cincinnati. But at quarterback, I think Joe Flacco is going to be a consistent streaming option. It looks like 2 touchdowns is pretty safe to bet on. In this offense, they don't run the ball near the goal line at all. So a touchdown for Jamar Chase, a touchdown for T. Higgins kind of feels like the norm. And if you get that type of floor, the yardage will probably be there to pad the numbers. The floor feels very safe with Flacco. He feels like at least as valuable as someone like Kyler Murray, where you'll get at least like 16 points every week with upside for 20 plus based on the touchdowns. His receivers are good enough to carry him as a safe streaming option at quarterback. But in super flex leagues, definitely a player I would be starting, definitely going to rank him top 20 yet again. Players I'm benching, though, would be Noah Fant of the Bengals. Because Tanner Hudson has returned, betting on a touchdown is a bit hard. And although I do think Fant is the best tight end in Cincinnati, it's just not my favorite cup of tea. The Chicago matchup isn't a significant upgrade, so only when he gets a great matchup would I rank him in the flex territory. In general, I'd leave him on the waiver wire. But Andre Yoshivas is just someone you're hoping gets a deep shot touchdown. In general, I do not trust Yoshi anywhere near enough to start. The Bengals defense is complete trash. I don't trust them. And then the Bears, although they have played well a little bit better since the bye week, I still don't fully trust them given they are top 15 matchups across the board and the Bengals do have a good offense. I think this game is more likely a shootout. I would be benching both defenses for sure. But despite the good matchup for Cole Kmet, can't trust him given he's probably out with a back injury. If he does play though, then I would be tempted to plug him in. I would be a little less excited to trust Colston Loveland. So hard to trust a Bears tight end, but the matchup is so good. If Kmet is out though, you have no choice but to keep him on the waiver wire. Luther Burden, however, has had some upside this year, a player I'm excited for in the future, but also has a lot of games with negative yardage, and it happened last week yet again. So cannot start him, way too boom bust. Not dying to do it, that's for sure. But because Burton has yet to emerge, Olamide Zaccheaus is actually getting some legitimate volume, and anyone against the Bengals does have upside, so he is my long shot candidate. The volume is a bit safer than Burton. I would consider him interesting, but if you told me Kmet was active, I would totally put Cole Kmet here instead of Zaccheaus, but I don't think Kmet will play, so I got to pick someone else instead. Lastly, though, Samaje Perine's role has been growing a little bit, and at some point, the vulture touchdown is inevitable. I believe he did have some consistent value last week as well, so not dying to trust him, but definitely a long shot candidate. Could emerge with a random vulture touchdown. Definitely possible to happen. Next matchup would be in Detroit. The Vikings come to town to take on this divisional rival. And a no-brainer in your lineup is obviously Jahmyr Gibbs. A top 5 running back, no chance you're benching him. However, the matchup is bottom 12 against the Vikings. I really don't care with Jahmyr Gibbs. He's matchup proof. Another player that's matchup proof would be Amon-Ra St. Brown. And given the Vikings are not great against receivers, maybe you're a little worried, but not enough given Amon-Ra and his track record. He's always a top 10 wide receiver. Definitely going to keep him in the lineup. So those two are obvious, but sometimes Laporta does waver a little bit. This matchup does rank top 12 for him, so I wouldn't be worried. I would definitely still be starting Laporta. Based on draft capital and track record, his upside is one of the highest you can find, and I do like this spot for him. I would expect Laporta to play well enough to start. But a player I just cannot bench would be Justin Jefferson. I'm a little worried about his lack of upside, though. Very few touchdowns this year, and it does look like JJ McCarthy is the quarterback this week. So not ideal, definitely loses value, but not enough to bench. I would still rank Jefferson in the top 10 just because McCarthy's the quarterback. Doesn't mean I'm giving up entirely on Justin Jefferson. But a player that is very tempting to start this week would be Jared Goff because he's playing at home, and especially off the bye, I expect the Lions offense to play really well. Goff always has extra upside in home games. He's just not the same outdoors, and in the dome, he should play fantastic. So I would expect Goff to be in my top 15, usually a high floor, but a bit touchdown dependent. If he gets vultured by the running backs too many times, sometimes he doesn't go over 15 points. So not a lock in the lineup, but a solid streaming flex option. And then Dave Montgomery has also had some very up and down game logs this year. Elite upside if it works out, but the matchup isn't the best you could find. And when it doesn't, when he doesn't score a touchdown, he has burned you several times this year. So I think he'll have a fine game, probably somewhere in the middle of what he's offered this year. I don't think it's his best performance, but I also don't think it's his worst. I think given the touchdown upside, Montgomery's still probably a good flex play. But the reason I think the Lions could have upside this week is because JJ McCarthy will get the start, and I have no confidence that McCarthy is actually a starting caliber quarterback. He's too young and unproven, where the Lions coming off a bye should play well. In division, I think they can stop him quite well. So their secondary is getting healthier. Aiden Hutchinson's a nightmare. The Lions against McCarthy have some upside, but still could give up like 40 points. If you told me it's a massive shootout and you get negative from Detroit, wouldn't be that shocked, but that's a very unlikely scenario. Odds are you get at least like a safe 6-point floor from Detroit. Some interceptions I would anticipate from McCarthy. But because McCarthy is the quarterback, I have to downgrade Jordan Addison. The matchup is really good, though. The Lions rank top 6 in terms of fantasy points allowed. You would expect Addison to play well here, but I just do not trust JJ McCarthy at all. And given Addison was suspended in the beginning of the year, we have not seen Addison and McCarthy on the field together at all this year, and there is major bust potential even for Jefferson, let alone Addison. So he has elite upside, could definitely give you 100 yards with some major deep shots. He's always pretty interesting, but with the rookie quarterback, I just don't trust the upside as much. Addison is a major liability because JJ McCarthy is the guy, and I don't know what at all to expect. On the bench, though, I am no longer confident in trusting Jameson Williams. The upside is phenomenal if you're really desperate, if all you need is 20 points, if 5 is not going to cut it, then go ahead and start Jameson Williams. But I just don't trust the consistency. At some point, I think Tesla gets a bit involved, and there's just been too many rough games where JMO is getting close to a bagel. It's just not worth it, in my opinion. So I will fade him. I'm going to bench JMO this week. I just don't feel confident. I think they can beat the Vikings without him, and I just don't want to press my luck. The risk is way too high. It's not really worth the reward anymore this year. But otherwise, I'm benching all of the Vikings, especially their defense. The Lions offense is not one I want to test, so no chance in hell I'm starting the Vikings defense. And then despite it being a revenge game for TJ Hawkinson, he's been with the Vikings for a few years now, and I don't think it carries as much weight anymore that it once did. So given McCarthy's the quarterback, I'm not dying to trust him. The matchup is neutral, and Hawkinson has been really hard to trust for touchdowns. This year, he's been just a floor play for like 5-6 points. So no thanks, no upgrade. I will be benching TJ Hawkinson because JJ McCarthy scares the fuck out of me. But then at running back, I have no desire to trust Jordan Mason at all. Last week, I liked the matchup for him and I was wrong. He was dog shit against the Chargers, and so was Aaron Jones. Neither of them played well in a good matchup. So what are they going to do in a terrible matchup? The Lions rank bottom 3 against the running back position, and this is definitely not a spot I want to go up against. So although Aaron Jones has probably more upside given his passing volume, I don't trust the overall touches enough, and the matchup is so bad I see a very capped ceiling. And then Jordan Mason needs a touchdown. I don't think it clicks against Detroit. They've been a terrible spot to go up against. So no thanks with either Vikings running back, Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones, staying on the bench this week. But my long shot for the Vikings would be JJ McCarthy. I have been shitting on him all throughout this segment, but there is a slight chance that he does play well. He has had some upside, like that Bears game week 1. He wasn't the worst fantasy start, but to believe in him is only believing in Kevin O'Connell and the weapons. You have to trust that Jefferson and Addison carry him, but if you told me he completely shits the bed, not going to be shocked at all. The Lions defense doesn't scare you. It is a top 10 matchup, so that's why he could play well, but I just don't want to bet on it. McCarthy feels like a player I need to see before I trust. Way too risky this week at Detroit. But given the Lions offense is pretty narrow, it's hard to find that many long shot candidates in the first place. It's going to be Isaac Tesla pretty much every week. Given his touchdown production, he looks really good. The volume is the only thing missing for him. At some point though, I think he will be an interesting flex option at some point, but not yet. Maybe off the bye it does happen, but I'm not starting Jamison Williams. I'm definitely not starting Isaac Tesla. So that's it for this matchup. Let's move on to the next one, where the Panthers travel to Green Bay to take on the Packers. Josh Jacobs did lose some value to Emmanuel Wilson, and he has been on the injury report a few times lately, so hopefully he's good to go, but assuming he's healthy, he's always a lock in the lineup. I would probably expect at least 1 or if not 2 touchdowns from Josh Jacobs. He's always the go-to goal line option for the Packers. But the biggest must start in this game would be Tucker Kraft. The matchup against Carolina is pretty good, ranks top 8, and he's been totally torching opponents in good matchups lately. So I 100% trust Tucker Kraft. Even in a bad matchup, he's matchup proof at this point, but in a positive matchup, I might be ranking him number 1 at the position. Jordan Love played way too good last week to be benching, so I would probably keep him in the lineup. I may not rank him top 10, but I think the lowest I would go would be top 12, 13. And although the Panthers rank bottom 11 in terms of matchups, it's not low enough for me to really fade. It's still a decent spot for Jordan Love, not terrible on paper. So last week was just so encouraging. Maybe he falls back down to earth, but I do like his upside, and I expect at least 1, if not 2 touchdowns to go to Tucker Kraft. So if another one goes to Romeo Doubs or Christian Watson, then Love could have another 3 touchdowns. His upside's pretty high, and at home, off their win, they probably play well on offense. So start Jordan Love, at the very least have him as a high-ranking streaming option this week. But for the Panthers, I think Tet McMillan is the only safe play. The volume is pretty safe to bet on. The matchup against the Packers corners isn't bad. It ranks top 13, so a pretty neutral overall matchup. And in general, Tet offers a very safe floor. I wouldn't expect anything else. So I would be starting Tet McMillan, going to rank him top 25 most likely. But because he's the only Panthers option I'm trusting, I think the Green Bay defense is probably going to have a solid, safe game this week. I would expect a decent floor from the Packers defense. They've stepped up lately. They have had some disappointing games. However, overall, they're talented enough where I would trust them. Micah Parsons probably going to give Bryce Young a big headache. So start the Packers defense. But in the flex territory, I'm a bit reluctant to fully endorse Romeo Doubs because the matchup is really bad. The Panthers shockingly rank bottom 4 at stopping the position, so not a good matchup at all. Definitely no upgrade for Romeo Doubs. And now that Christian Watson is back, it's a pretty crowded offense overall. Not a safe bet with any particular Packers receiver. So in a big downgrade in terms of matchups, I'm not going to trust him. Definitely going to fade Romeo Doubs, but is still my preferred Packers receiver, still in the flex conversation for sure. Last week in his return, Christian Watson well outperformed Matthew Golden. So if you're shooting for upside, I could see him have yet another decent game. But honestly, I think I'm putting him in the wrong category. I kind of feel like he's more of a sit bench option. I feel reluctant to actually trust Christian Watson, given the Packers receiving room is pretty crowded, and maybe last week was a bit of a fluke. It could easily pivot away from him. Could get injured again. He's been pretty injury prone throughout his career, but last week was encouraging. I would definitely roster Christian Watson. Some high upside if a touchdown does click. But the matchup for running backs against Green Bay is terrible. They rank bottom 3 against the position, so not going to be starting Chuba Hubbard if I don't have to, but after last week, the volume is not going away from him, so he's still somewhat viable as a high floor flex play. But Rico Dowdle is not going away. Rico Dowdle is still involved, still more efficient and effective on his limited touches. So Dowdle, I don't think is that much worse than Chuba. You could still start him and get away with it, but at the best, he's a flex play. His recent upside is kind of the only reason to trust him, but I could see him burning you. Could have very capped ceiling, given the volume is really low now that Chuba is back. But a player I think is a very interesting streaming candidate would be Jatavion Sanders, the tight end for the Panthers. And this matchup against Green Bay has given up the 3rd most fantasy points on the year. A very, very good spot for Jatavion Sanders. So I like to trust upgrades and downgrades. I think if you're streaming tight end, why not look to Jatavion Sanders? Top 3 matchup, should score a touchdown, and the yardage should be there. They've been very vulnerable against the position this season. But a player I'm definitely benching would be Matthew Golden. He's been way too up and down, too inconsistent. And I knew once Christian Watson would come back, then he would not be a safe play at all. I didn't expect Watson to overtake him that fast, so now I would be hitting the panic button for sure. Golden feels like a very risky start. Hasn't done much this year, and it probably dwindles to even less. At the moment, I don't think Jayden Reed is coming back, but especially when he does, the Packers receiving core is going to be way less safe. The only one I would even consider probably would be Romeo Doubs. But at the moment, I think Jayden Reed remains on IR, so keep him on the waiver wire, but I think he might come back in week 10, so maybe you're willing to pick him up. He does have upside when he's back on the field. But Dontavian Wicks is injured, and now that the receivers are getting healthy, definitely not starting Dontavian Wicks. The quarterback matchup is not bad for Bryce Young, but even in good matchups, he has a very cap ceiling, very low production this year, so not going to start Bryce Young, that's for sure. And then the wide receiver 2 is pretty much up for grabs in Carolina. I trust Tet to be the one, but if you told me it's Coker or you told me it's Leggett, I really could see either one play well. We saw Leggett have a great game 2 weeks ago, but then last week I do believe Coker did see more targets. So not going to trust either option. The Packers aren't a bad matchup, but it's just too random to trust either guy. No thanks with Coker or Leggett. But the Packers offense is a good one. I do not trust the Panthers defense. I think their offense will keep it somewhat close. However, I do not see much upside or even much of a floor for the Panthers defense. No thank you. I would bench them if I can. But lastly, my long shot for the Packers is backup running back Emmanuel Wilson. I do think he's worth a stash. I think he's a solid handcuff, and Jacobs has been a bit banged up. If last week's usage for Wilson repeats, then he will be kind of annoying for Jacobs owners, and I could see him have some legitimate flex appeal in good matchups. But this is not a great matchup, ranks number 20 against Carolina, so not a big enough upgrade where I would consider a handcuff in my lineup. But Tommy Tremble does have a great matchup, and sometimes the tight end you're not expecting does score the touchdown. So if Jatavion lets us down, it's probably going to be because Tommy Tremble vultures him, and that's where he does factor in as my long shot candidate. I do think Tommy Tremble might have a higher ceiling than guys like Coker or Leggett. But that's it for this game. Let's move on to the next one, where in Tennessee, the Chargers take on the Titans. And I think this matchup is super straightforward. Start all of your Chargers, and especially Justin Herbert. Herbert is playing at an MVP level. Joe Alt is back. And now that Oronde Gadsden has popped off, Herbert should have at least 3 go-to weapons every single week. So 100% start Justin Herbert. He's earned your trust at this point, and the Titans is not a bad matchup. But I do think, like we expected back in the offseason, Ladd McConkey is his top target. Over the last 4 games, Ladd has 41 targets. I am definitely keeping him in the lineup. But after the last 2 weeks, it looks like Oronde Gadsden is the next man up, a very reliable target. And while the matchup against the Titans isn't amazing, I kind of feel like Gadsden might be matchup proof. He is putting up so much yardage, I can't envision you're benching him. If you picked him up off the wire, why the fuck would you be benching Oronde Gadsden? But Keenan Allen off the mini bye week, I think will be well rested and play well. He is also a player I cannot envision benching at all. Just such a reliable target, go-to. And given the other players are stepping up, it's easy to kind of forget about him a little bit. He gets open quite a bit. So his route running is still elite. I would be trusting Keenan Allen for sure. But the player with arguably the highest upside this week would be Kamani Vidal. The Titans have been the second most vulnerable matchup for running backs, and they've given up over 11 touchdowns this season to the position. So I think a touchdown is a guarantee for Vidal. The volume is on lock, and the backups behind him are also banged up. Kamani will get probably 20 touches and dominate in garbage time. I would expect him to get a heavy workload in the second half. So definitely going to start him, a must start in this top 2 matchup. And given the Titans offense is just so fucking bad, the Chargers are a must start. Anyone against the Titans is a good start at defense. So it's pretty obvious for this game, start every Charger, even the defense. However, after the bagel, I would be benching Quentin Johnston. I do not trust Quentin Johnston anywhere near enough. Now that Gadsden is legit, Gadsden has clearly taken his job, and that's a bummer if you were trusting QJ over the last 4 games. But for the Titans, I think Tyjae Spears has more explosiveness and a similar role than Tony Pollard, so the volume isn't that much different. I think Tyjae has higher upside, but the matchup is really hard to know what you're going to get. On the season, they rank number 18. The Chargers defense hasn't been the most difficult spot. However, last week they really shut down the Vikings, and they were great in the first 3 games of the season. However, all throughout October, with the exception of last week, they've been terrible. And honestly, I can't tell you definitively if the Chargers are a good or bad matchup. I'm going to assume they're somewhat neutral. And for that reason, you're kind of not changing your opinion on the Titans backfield. So that's why they're still flex plays, not the safest options. Tyjae had a good game last week, but I don't really trust him. It could pivot back to Pollard, and I wouldn't be shocked at all. So I would rather go Tyjae, but I'm probably still ranking Tony Pollard like right behind him. It still feels like a big committee between the two, relatively close to 50-50. But I do think Tyjae has higher upside. I would be ranking Tyjae above Pollard moving forward. But because the bar is so low to clear for tight ends, I do think Chig Okonkwo has some streaming value. The floor has been pretty good for him, and especially without Calvin Ridley, it does feel like he's the most reliable target for Cam Ward. So he is in the flex discussion, but got to be a bit desperate. Definitely just a streaming option. You could leave him on the waiver wire and get away with it. He's not that valuable, but not so unvaluable that you should dismiss him entirely. I could see Okonkwo have another solid 6 or 7 point game. But Cam Ward has proven nothing this year, so definitely benching him. Can't trust him at all. And the Chargers offense can definitely drop 30 plus pretty easily, so 100% benching the Titans. They also shipped away one of their corners, so getting even worse on defense now. And then although Ridley is out, I do not trust a single Titans pass catcher. My preference is still a Yamanor, but not by much. The volume for Chimere DK and even Van Jefferson right behind him isn't that much different. They're all kind of getting the same volume, and they're all kind of equal to each other. So maybe Chimere DK is my preference, but not by much. It hasn't quite been confident enough to bet on either of them. If it's not Ridley, no thanks with a Titans receiver. But Jarrett Patterson is filling in for Hassan Haskins. I'm not going to start a backup Chargers running back, but the matchup is so good, maybe he does vulture Kimani on the goal line. My best long shot for this game would be Calvin Ridley, but honestly, I don't think he'll be healthy enough to play, so not expecting him to suit up, not expecting any value from Ridley this week. And then Trey Harris has also started to emerge a little bit in the Chargers offense. It's possible he overtakes Quentin Johnston. They drafted him in the 2nd round for a reason, but until Gadsden goes away, it's really hard to trust Trey Harris or Quentin Johnston. But at some point, his time will come. I could see Trey Harris have some value down the stretch of the season. I do think he could overtake Quentin Johnston pretty easily. But that's it for this game. Let's move on to the next one. We're in New England. The Patriots host the Falcons, and the Patriots are actually a very, very difficult matchup overall, especially for quarterbacks and running backs. So even though Bijan shit the bed against the Dolphins, that was a major shock, I would still confidently start him. I'm not going to pretend like Bijan is a player I'm worried about. He will bounce back very quickly, and odds are even in a bad matchup, bottom 5, he still plays very well. So still going to start Bijan Robinson, and then assuming he's healthy enough, I'm definitely still starting Drake London. I feel like because he was inactive, that's why their offense was so bad. They just keyed in on Bijan the entire game, and the fumble also didn't help, but the entire Falcons offense was dog shit. I think they'll be much better against the Patriots if London does come back. So if he's healthy, I will start him, but got to make sure he is active. That's very important. But based on the production this year, I think Drake May is a must start. I consider him relatively matchup proof at this point, even though the Falcons are a bottom 2 matchup, a very good defense on the year. Last week, they did just get torched by Tua and the Dolphins. So I would still be starting Drake May. I'm not going to downgrade him that much. I still think he'll be in my top 12 at the position. But because I don't know who the quarterback is at the moment, I do think the Patriots defense is probably worth a start as well. The Pats have played well, and they're starting to force some turnovers now. I do consider the Pats a safe enough play because I really don't trust Penix or Cousins at all. If you tell me it's Cousins again, and especially if London doesn't suit up, then the Patriots will be a must start for sure. But at flex, the volume for Stephon Diggs is still a little bit tricky to bet on. And other than last week, touchdowns have not been his calling card at all. So the upside has been a little bit capped. The volume has been safe enough to trust, though. The floor is there, and he could definitely put up another 100-yard game. Wouldn't be surprised if it happened. But the Falcons matchup isn't ideal. So with a on-paper downgrade, I would only consider Diggs as a flex play, not a must start. But the main reason I'm not dying to trust him is because Kayshon Boutte is really emerging. Kayshon Boutte kind of feels like he has higher upside, given he has more touchdowns and a bit more usage down the field. So some upside for Boutte, but not the best matchup. He is in the flex conversation, and if you wanted to start him, I wouldn't be that upset with you, but it still feels like a big gamble. I would roster him for sure, but probably not going to rank him in the top 30 at the position. But a player who on paper gets an upgrade here against the Falcons would be Ramondre Stevenson. It ranks top 12, and it's really just a question of will he score touchdowns. Without it, Ramondre is terrible, a big liability, and has had some major bust games with less than 5 points pretty often this year. But he has had some multiple touchdown games, some double-digit fantasy upside is definitely there. And if the matchup is good, then maybe you will trust him. But I don't. I still consider him a major risk factor. And last week, Trayvon Henderson did start to play well. If not for the fumble, though, then maybe Ramondre would maybe lose his job. But I don't think it's going to happen. I still think Ramondre is the guy you want. And against the Falcons, maybe you'll consider him in your flex spot. But call me crazy, I still think Darnell Mooney has some value as a flex play. I'm not going to start him if I don't have to, but I could still see some upside. I could see a bit of a shootout against the Patriots, and I would expect Christian Gonzalez to be draped on London. Penix will have to look elsewhere, and Mooney is definitely the next man up. So he still gets targeted down the field. I know last week was terrible, but I could still see like a 40-yard catch turn into a house call. I still see some upside, but it's yet to materialize on Mooney. Similar to Kayshon Boutte, you probably don't start him, but I would still roster him. There is still some upside with this player. However, the biggest upgrade in terms of matchups this week would go to Kyle Pitts. The Patriots rank as a top 6 matchup for tight ends, and they gave up a touchdown to both Harold Fannin and David Njoku last week. I do think Kyle Pitts gets a solid upgrade, but in general, it's hard to trust him, so just a streaming option. Not going to rank him top 10, but I do think he cracks my top 15 against the Patriots. It's a very good matchup on paper. But the Pats offense is rolling, so I'm definitely going to bench the Falcons if I can. They have been good this year, but after that terrible game against the Dolphins, I'm not going to press my luck. I do not trust them at all. I would assume that Penix comes back to the field. However, I don't know that for sure. Even if he does play, the matchup is terrible against New England, so 100% benching Michael Penix. But if Kirk Cousins gets the start instead, I would bench him even more vehemently. There's no chance I'm starting Cousins after last week's debacle by the Falcons. So hopefully Penix comes back, but I'm not so sure yet who the starter is. But because the matchup is so bad, this is not a spot where I'm going to be trusting the backup Falcons running back. Algier has had some value, but only in good matchups do I consider him flex worthy. This is not one of them. The Patriots are a bottom 5 spot for Algier. So only going to trust Bijan, no chance in hell am I trusting Algier. Last week was encouraging for Travion Henderson, but haven't seen enough from him. The fumble was also really, really unfortunate. So despite some upside, he was efficient last week. I do not trust Travion yet. Not going to start him, that's for sure. But Demario Douglas is not the guy you want. I'd much rather go Kayshon Boutte than Demario Douglas. And at some point, Kyle Williams could still factor in. I do not trust Demario Douglas at all. But in general, Hunter Henry is a tight end you might consider starting. However, he has been really capped for upside lately, and sometimes Austin Hooper does vulture him. So in a bad matchup like this, no chance in hell am I starting Hunter Henry. The Falcons give up the fewest fantasy points overall to the position, and I am worried that Henry is not getting enough volume anymore. So needs a touchdown, not expecting it, definitely benching Hunter Henry. No chance in hell would I start him. And if I'm not going to start Henry, then I'm definitely not starting Hooper. That's a major liability with tight ends against Atlanta. But the long shots in this game are definitely players I have no interest in. Kaderil Hodge could play well given London was inactive last week. He did step up as the next man, but honestly, I'm not dying to trust him at all. That feels way too risky. And same goes with Mac Hollins. Hollins did have the most yards of all the Pats receivers last week, and Drake May does chuck it down the field pretty well, but Hollins, major liability, no thank you. I would much rather go Boutte or even Pop Douglas. Hollins feels like way too risky of a gamble. We're halfway done, so let's move on to the next matchup. The Niners travel to the Giants, and there's no chance in hell you are benching Christian McCaffrey. Always a lock in your lineup. Last week was a little bit discouraging, but against Houston, that was a much more difficult matchup. The Giants rank as a top 7 spot, so no doubt about it, McCaffrey is a lock in the lineup, might be the RB1 yet again this week. And George Kittle got back in the end zone. If you have George Kittle, there is no way I am benching him. We know he has some of the highest upside of any tight end in the NFL, so have to keep starting him. The bagel 2 weeks ago was a fluke. Not going to expect that too often. But Juwan Jennings appears to be getting healthier and was the top target last week. So given the matchup is really good for him, top 10 against the Giants, I would be starting Juwan Jennings regardless of who the quarterback is for the Niners. But the Niners defense is depleted, and this matchup is average for Jackson Dart. His rushing value is not going to go away. If anything, without Cam Scatterbo, he'll be running the ball even more. So I like this spot for him. The Niners just gave up 30 plus rushing yards to CJ Stroud, a quarterback that is typically immobile, and Jackson Dart can easily offer you 50 plus rushing yards in even a rough matchup. So I like Jackson Dart's floor. The rushing stats are just so safe to bet on, and the upside is pretty high. The Niners defense doesn't scare you very much given their lack of healthy personnel. I think it's an upgrade for Jackson Dart. So I'd be starting him with confidence. I'm definitely ranking him in the top 12 and probably most weeks going forward, regardless of matchup. But given Cam Scatterbo did get injured and is out for the year, I think Tyron Tracy is a very legit plug and play. And especially in this matchup against the Niners that ranks top 10, I consider him a must start. I'm going to be ranking him top 20 for sure. And the volume will be there. I trust the floor to be bust proof. Last year he had some value, so I wouldn't dismiss him at all. I think the Giants offense can still be productive even after losing Scatterbo. Tyron Tracy isn't the worst backup you could have. But players I'm flexing, assuming Mac Jones is the quarterback, definitely a super flex option for sure. Generally just a streaming option, but the floor is usually high. Last week against Houston was a terrible matchup, and he wasn't atrociously bad, but also wasn't good. So I'm going to bet on him in better matchups here. The Giants do rank top 5, so definitely no doubt about it. I'm not going to fade Mac Jones. The only reason I would bench him, though, is if Brock Purdy gets the start. So that's why Brock Purdy is my long shot candidate for the Niners. I'm not sure he gets back to full health this week, and for that reason, I'm not expecting him to get the start, but it is possible. I kind of feel like they're saving him for the Rams matchup though, but if he's healthy, if he's good to go, I'm sure he wants his job back. I'm sure he'll be the starter if he's available. So Purdy might be the guy. If he does get the start, I'd probably rank him in the top 12 for sure. The matchup is so good. I see a lot of upside for Brock Purdy. So he'd be more of a starting option than a flex option. I do see more value for Purdy this week than Mac Jones. But Kendrick Bourne's value is pretty dependent on who that quarterback is. While I do think he'll be running a lot of routes and Purdy can still get him the ball, his chemistry with Mac Jones is way better. And last week, Juwan Jennings did overtake him. It was about time. So Kendrick Bourne, still a major liability. That game against the Rams feels like a long time ago and a bit fluky to bet on to happen again. And so Bourne needs Mac Jones as the starter, but the matchup isn't bad. It doesn't rank top 10. I would consider him a decent flex play. Regardless of the quarterback, he still has some upside in this offense. But with no Cam Scatteraboo, I'm sure some people might consider the Niners as an interesting option. I'm not going to tell you to start them, but I will probably rank them top 20. I could see them somewhat play well. But on the road in the East Coast early window, I kind of feel like I'm wrong to put them here. I kind of want to put them in the sit category now that I'm thinking about it and can see it. So never mind, bench the Niners, don't trust him. But for the Giants, I feel like you can trust Wanda Robinson from a floor standpoint pretty well. So I consider him a good flex play, clearly the number one receiver for Jackson Dart. And with no Scatteraboo, that's probably even more valuable. With no Neighbors, you know he was the most heavily targeted guy in that offense. So Wandale, a good floor play in general, but Theo Johnson has been kind of boom bust every week that he doesn't score a touchdown. The next week he does find the end zone. And if that trend continues, then this week he'll score another touchdown. So Theo Johnson has very high upside, but also very low floor. The boom bust potential of Theo is kind of worth it, kind of tempting, but also could burn you tremendously. So good luck there. He's not an automatic start, but I do think a solid streaming option at tight end. And then until Ricky Pearsall comes back, I'm definitely not starting Sticky Ricky. So assuming he does remain inactive, I'm not going to put him in my lineup. I think he'll be out yet again. And then Brian Robinson Jr. is always a player to bench, not trusting him until McCaffrey goes down. But the Niners have a good offense, so I'm not going to trust the Giants defense. I did pick them to win the game, and sometimes their defensive line is really good. So potentially they have some upside, but in general against the Niners, I'm not going to press my luck. I will probably just bench the Giants if I can. But Darius Slayton is healthy again, but last week wasn't encouraging enough to trust, so I'll keep him on the waiver wire or at least the bench. And same with Daniel Bellinger. He does contribute a little bit, but it feels way too crazy to start Daniel Bellinger with confidence. But I mentioned Brock Purdy is my long shot for the Niners. If he plays, I think you should be starting him. And for the Giants, my long shot would be Devin Singletary, who might contribute more than expected with no Cam Scatteraboo. I think he'll get some looks, but not many. I'm not dying to roster him or even consider picking him up. I think you should keep him on the waiver wire. I only trust Tyrone Tracy. So no thanks with him. But that's it for this matchup. Let's move on to the next one. Where in Pittsburgh, the Colts take on the Steelers. The Colts offense has been elite this year, so there's no chance in hell I'm starting the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if you look at their matchup stats, they give up the second most points per game to opposing quarterbacks and tight ends. It's a top 7 matchup for receivers, and then still relatively neutral and average against running backs. So the Steelers pay a lot of money to be really below average. They are too old and too banged up. I see no upside. There's no chance they stop the Colts' juggernaut offense. So while I'm benching the Steelers defense 100%, I am starting Jonathan Taylor. No doubt about it. He is arguably the best running back in the league. But Tyler Warren has the chance to one day be the best tight end in football. And given this matchup for him, he might be the best tight end on the week. The Steelers cannot stop the position at all, and Warren is a lock in the lineup. Definitely a big upgrade for him. I would expect at least 60 yards and a touchdown for Tyler Warren. But another top 2 matchup, as I mentioned, is for Daniel Jones. The Steelers are really struggling to stop anyone, so Daniel Jones has been a very consistent option this year, definitely a top 10 quarterback against the Steelers in a top 2 matchup. His go-to target in the red zone has been Michael Pittman. The touchdowns have come like clockwork for him. So in this matchup, top 7 against the Steelers, I don't think Jalen Ramsey will be a major problem. Maybe you're worried, but I am not. I would still keep going back to the well and starting Michael Pittman. The Colts offense just scores way too many touchdowns to fade. But at least for the Steelers, there is one good matchup here that I do want to trust. I'm definitely starting DK Metcalf against the Colts. Their secondary is really banged up. Their best option is on IR. Charvarius Ward is out with a concussion. So DK Metcalf in a top 4 matchup is a must start. There is no way I'm ranking Metcalf outside the top 20. I would expect a clear touchdown to go in his favor. Definitely start Metcalf against the Colts. However, Jaylen Warren is not the safest bet in general. I trust his floor. The volume has been there, and he is one of the few starting running backs in the league. So he'll probably rank in the flex conversation for sure. I can't fade him too much, but I'm not going to rank him top 15. The Colts are a bottom 10 matchup for him, and that is a downgrade. He could get vultured by Kenny Gainwell as well, and in general, he's not the safest touchdown producer. So Warren, I think, is just a floor play this week. Not ideal, just a flex option, not a must start against the Colts. But I really like the Colts passing game. Josh Downs is really reliable. And honestly, Alec Pierce is one of the better, more underrated deep threats you can find in the league. I think both of them have very, very solid floors in this matchup. But I'm definitely starting Josh Downs with a lot more confidence than Alec Pierce. He's a much safer bet for volume. And then I also trust a touchdown in the red zone to go to him more likely than not. So I like Josh Downs a lot, but I do not want to dismiss Alec Pierce at all. He can easily give you 50, 60 plus yards on just like 2 catches. He's done it like 4 times this year. A very interesting flyer as a backup receiver. I do think he's in the flex conversation. Most people, though, don't even roster Alec Pierce. So maybe I should tell you to sit him. Maybe he's more of a long shot given his roster percentage, but I consider him more of a flex play. I like the upside for Alec Pierce. But in the Steelers offense, the quarterback is definitely not the problem. I think Rodgers has a neutral matchup here, and he has been playing well enough. So I do think he's a legit streaming option. I will be ranking him top 20 because I could see a lot of back and forth garbage time. I don't think the Steelers just quit and roll over. The Colts defense does not scare me. I think Rodgers will throw multiple touchdowns here and few turnovers. Give me Rodgers as a good flex play in 2 quarterback leagues. But the matchup for tight ends does rank top 4. The Colts are also a very good spot. So Jonnu Smith could produce, but given Pat Freiermuth also contributes, I just don't really trust either Steelers tight end. If you put a gun to my head, though, I would still go to Jonnu Smith. I think he's the safer bet for volume, but he never gets targeted down the field. It's all like checkdowns and hoping for yards after the catch. The ceiling is actually pretty low on Jonnu, so it's only the matchup. For that reason, I'm probably still going to bench him, but is in the streaming conversation for sure in a good matchup. But you could definitely get vultured by Pat Freiermuth. You could argue he's the guy you'd rather have, but in general, I'd rather stick with Jonnu than Pat Freiermuth. At wide receiver, though, it is a top 4 matchup for Calvin Austin, so perhaps that deep shot does click, but Austin has been injured a little bit this season. Last week, I had some upside for him, but it went to Roman Wilson, and I don't really trust Austin. Even as a pickup off the wire, it's not that compelling to be doing. So no thanks on Calvin Austin, and no thanks on Kenny Gainwell. The matchup is bad for Warren and Gainwell. I'm not going to be trusting the backup Steelers RB. The Colts defense, though, I don't think is healthy enough to trust. Their offense scores a shit ton of points, so odds are there's enough garbage time where you do get burned. Trusting the Colts. But their change of pace running back is Amir Abdullah, not DJ Giddens. So he is in the sit territory for sure. Not going to trust him at all, but maybe he vultures Taylor for a touchdown. And then the more I think about it, this player should probably be Alec Pierce, but honestly, I like Pierce enough to put him in the flex territory. I will keep A.D. Mitchell here instead, but A.D. Mitchell is not a safe bet at all. I would be benching A.D. Mitchell. But an interesting flyer would be Roman Wilson, who did have a deep touchdown last week, had a good game against the Packers, but I haven't seen enough from him. I believe in him. I liked him coming out of the draft, but it's been so rough to start his career. He has never really proven you can trust him. So last week was encouraging, but not enough to feel safe with it. I would rather go Calvin Austin than Roman Wilson, but is my long shot, could play well for the second week in a row. Let's move on, though, to the Broncos at the Texans, and this game is going to have a shit ton of defense. I'm not excited to start anyone, really. When you look at these matchups, the Broncos are so brutal. Bottom 3 for quarterbacks and wide receivers facing off against Denver, and then still bottom 11 for running backs and tight ends. The same can be said for Houston. It's bottom 3 in the same 2 categories. Quarterbacks and wide receivers really struggle against Houston, and then running backs, a bottom 10 matchup. Same for tight ends, also bottom 10. So I think you should be starting the Broncos defense with some confidence. Even if Surtain is inactive, I haven't seen enough consistency from Houston's offense to trust him, and all these stats indicate it is a bottom 10 matchup across the board for the Texans offense. I would trust the Broncos in my lineup. For the same reason, I would also trust the Texans defense in my lineup. Really tough spot, but the Broncos offense is much better, so I would definitely rather go Denver than Houston. But Houston, I think I will rank top 12. They've played so well. Even when they lost to the Seahawks pretty badly, they had 4 turnovers, and that could definitely happen. I could see Bo Nix get a little interception prone in this matchup. So I'd be starting both Houston and Denver on defense, but the only offensive player for the Texans you have to start is Nico Collins, and he might still be in the concussion protocol, not the safest lock to play, but I would assume he is active. I assume Nico gets back from the concussion protocol. It rarely keeps players out for more than one game, and he's always a top 10 wide receiver, and especially given Surtain might not be available, it's not as scary of a matchup. So gotta still trust Nico Collins, but despite a bottom 10 matchup here for J.K. Dobbins, I'm still going to trust the running back in Denver. They want to run the ball, and even though McCaffrey struggled, I still feel like Dobbins is probably going to stay in my top 20. He might be more of a flex play, but I feel like odds are you'll still keep Dobbins in the lineup. The production from him has been solid enough where I'm still probably going to start J.K. Dobbins, but not feeling great about it. I could feel like this is a very bad call here. I kind of want to put him in the flex discussion now that I talk it through out loud. But Bo Nix, despite his upside this year, is definitely just a streaming option this week. Definitely not a safe, high-end top 10 play against the Texans. It's the worst matchup you can find, and opposing quarterbacks are averaging less than 10 points against the Texans. So ideally, you can bench Bo Nix. I'd rather avoid the risk, but his upside has been high enough where if you're stuck with him, I get starting him. You could do much worse than Bo Nix, but maybe not. Maybe the matchup is still worthy of a benching. I could argue you should bench Courtland Sutton. Last week was not his best game, and against Dallas, I didn't see that coming at all. So against Derek Stingley, it's a bit more obvious to be fading him, but still in the flex conversation, it's hard to fully bench Sutton outright given his track record. But Evan Ingram is always in the flex conversation at tight end. He's in that streaming territory. A good backup, but not a great starter. I'm never going to rank him top 10 with confidence unless the matchup is amazing. But in general, he offers you like a 30-40 yard floor, and that's pretty bust proof. At tight end, it's hard to ask for less than that. So I would probably flex Ingram if I needed to, but in general, he's just a backup, not a must start. But after last week, I'm definitely growing some confidence in trusting RJ Harvey. But the matchup was elite. I trust that a lot more than this matchup. It's bottom 10 for him this week. And unless there's like some good game script where he's catching a bunch of passes, I don't see a ton of upside for RJ Harvey at Houston. So not ideal just in the flex conversation, but is gaining value. Last week, I probably would have told you to sit him in this matchup. If not for the Cowboys explosion, I wouldn't have as much confidence in RJ Harvey, but definitely moving up my board. If you roster RJ Harvey, should feel good to have him as the season goes on. The rookie should play even better every single week. I think he'll improve. But Dalton Schultz, I don't think is the safest bet. He was pretty banged up after the Seahawks game, and last week did kind of fall off a cliff. Maybe the Niners just targeted him on defense so much that he was never open, but it wasn't encouraging expecting a good game without Nico. He did let me down quite a bit. So I won't give up on him. The volume has been good this year, but just a streaming option, definitely not a must start. That's for sure. But then players I'm benching would be Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, the two rookie wide receivers I don't feel safe enough to trust. Jaden Higgins, I think, will be relegated to your bench now that Nico is coming back. But with Jalen Noel, I don't think Christian Kirk is coming back anytime soon. With a hamstring injury, he is out yet again, most likely. And as the starting slot receiver, I do think the floor is somewhat viable for Jalen Noel, but he hasn't scored touchdowns this year. He's just a floor option. I think against Denver, it's such a bad matchup. I'd just rather bench him and avoid it. But I could see some value if there's so much attention on Nico and Surtain isn't playing, then maybe he gets a good matchup. Maybe it's better than the stats would suggest. But Nick Chubb, I think, has been overtaken by Woody Marks, so I would be benching Nick Chubb. And I forgot to mention him, but Woody Marks is in my flex discussion. I think Woody has earned a bit more trust. I think he's the guy in Houston, but I'm not dying to start him. The matchup isn't amazing, but the volume in the passing game does carry him to a decent floor. I was too low on Troy Franklin last week, but honestly, I wasn't sure if the good game would go to him or Marvin Mims. And considering Mims completely shit the bed, I don't fully regret my rank on Troy Franklin. I had him in the top 35, but I should have had him higher. He really outperformed what I expected. I thought Sutton would have the game that went to him. So Franklin in a much worse matchup is still not a player I'm trusting. I would be benching him for sure. I still kind of view him in the same category as Mims, where you could get a bagel and it wouldn't shock you. So definitely benching Mims, but I think this week I'll be benching Franklin as well in a very tough matchup. And then given the matchup is so bad for CJ Stroud, I don't trust him at all whatsoever. Bottom 3 for quarterbacks, and Stroud doesn't run it generally. Last week felt like a fluke, so maybe I'm really underestimating Stroud, but I just don't see it. I don't want to trust him against Denver. Even Dak had a terrible game against the Broncos. So no thanks with Stroud, but my preferred long shot for this game would be Pat Bryant of the Broncos. Back in the offseason, Sean Payton was raving about him, and he did have a good game last week with a touchdown. He could play well, but odds are he won't. Xavier Hutchinson, though, looks to be like the guy in the red zone. If Nico Collins doesn't play, he's a bit more tempting than Jaden Higgins, in my opinion. So Hutchinson might have some value, but odds are just a long shot you'll keep on the waiver wire. And then in this Jaguars-Raiders game, I am expecting Brock Bowers to return, and he would get a top 11 matchup. So even if it was a bad matchup, I would definitely tell you to start Brock Bowers, but given it's an upgrade 100%, he needs to be in the lineup. I think he'll be healthy. Everything that I've read reports that Bowers will be back on the field. But as of this taping, I'm not quite sure I can say that about Brian Thomas Jr. The injury he suffered in London did force him out, and he is questionable for this game. So not a lock to play. I could see him miss, and if he does, then you're benching him. But if he plays, I think you're definitely starting him. The matchup is top 5 against Las Vegas for receivers. So 100% start BTJ if active, just make sure he's healthy. And then given Geno Smith throws many interceptions so far this year, I would expect the Jags to be a coveted defense to start. But honestly, I think that the Bowers offense might be a little bit better. The Jags kind of scare me a little bit. I still think their defensive production have been a little bit hard to trust this year, but against Las Vegas on paper, you should be starting the Jags defense. I'm also going to start Travis Etienne. The Raiders have actually been good at stopping the run, but only from a yardage standpoint. They give up a lot of touchdowns, and that's why they do rank as a neutral matchup overall. So I'm not going to fade Etienne. While maybe his yards per carry aren't amazing this week, I would expect a touchdown for Etienne. The Raiders have given up a lot in that category. So I'm going to start Etienne for sure. But then a player I'm most likely flexing would be Travis Hunter, who played really well against the Rams in London. A breakout game for him, over 100 yards and a touchdown. And especially in this matchup, ranks top 5, I would upgrade him significantly. So I like his upside a lot. I think the value is there. And especially if Brian Thomas Jr. is inactive, if he's actually too banged up to play, then Hunter would move over to the start column for sure. I would trust at least like 10 targets for Hunter. I would assume he'd play all the snaps on offense. So I like Travis Hunter's upside for sure. I like the floor. Even if BTJ doesn't play, the matchup is good. So I would be flexing Travis Hunter for sure. The Raiders defense doesn't scare you very much. So Trevor Lawrence usually offers a decent floor option. So he's in the flex conversation as well, but only in a 2 quarterback league would I trust him. And then Geno Smith, shockingly, does enter the streaming conversation as well, because the Jaguars rank as the 3rd best matchup for quarterbacks this season. But the 5 touchdowns that Stafford threw maybe is a big reason why. I'm not totally sure that the Jags are this vulnerable to the position. Off the bye, they might be much better on defense, but on paper, it is an upgrade for Geno. So if you're super desperate, maybe you have Hurts and Baker in a super flex league, you might be looking to the waiver wire, and Geno is probably available. The matchup indicates he does have higher upside in this spot. But the only reason I have any confidence is because Bowers is coming back. Last time Bowers was healthy was week 1, and the Raiders beat the Patriots, and Geno threw for well over 300 yards. There has been some upside for him, but odds are it doesn't happen. Odds are you'll bench him. But on paper, the matchup is not great for Ashton Genty. It ranks bottom 6, so I am downgrading him a little bit. I'm still going to flex him, but definitely not going to rank him as an automatic start. That is for sure. So no thanks with Genty if I can avoid it. But odds are, I think from a floor standpoint, the volume will carry you. And if you get that touchdown, you'll be fine. So he is still a solid flex play. But the receivers for Las Vegas get a good matchup here, top 8. So Trey Tucker has been the safest one to bet on. I'd rather go with Trey Tucker. However, Jacoby Myers should be getting healthy, and perhaps he looked so bad because Bowers was off the field and they just double teamed him earlier in the season. So I do still think Jacoby has some value, but I'm not dying to start him. He's been so bad, hasn't scored a touchdown, there's no upside, and trusting Geno Smith is a hard bet to make. So with Bowers coming back, maybe he plays well, but odds are he gets fewer targets, and I would rather bench him if I can. No thanks with Jacoby Myers. But if you tell me Bowers sits out again, then Michael Mayer does get a good matchup here, so would be more of a flex play streaming option rather than an outright bench. But the Jags tight end is really bad until Brenton Strange comes back off IR. I'm not starting Hunter Long. Baishal Tutin maybe emerges after the bye, but has been really fading fast lately, so not going to trust him. Needs a touchdown, and that's not a good bet this week. But De'Ami Brown, not factoring in enough to trust. I'll definitely bench him. And then the Raiders defense has just been so bad this year, I have no desire to trust them at all. But the Jags don't scare me that much. I could see them have like a 5-point floor. It might not be the worst floor play you could find, but definitely benching them. They have sucked overall this year. However, my long shot for the Jaguars would be Parker Washington, especially if Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't play. Washington has been the next man up and is heavily targeted in the red zone, especially. So I could see a touchdown for Parker Washington this week. He is my long shot candidate for the Jaguars. But this player you probably don't even know is on the Raiders at this moment. Tyler Lockett asked for a release from the Titans, and they granted it over the bye week. The Raiders did sign Tyler Lockett, who is very familiar with Pete Carroll and even Geno Smith, so that's why he's my long shot. I really doubt he has any value at all, but it is possible that the chemistry between Lockett and Geno does crop up again and does show up in a major way. I could see a touchdown for Lockett, given the matchup is good for receivers. Maybe he gets enough snaps to move the needle, but not going to expect anything from him. Just wanted to mention that he's now a Las Vegas Raider. So that's it for this game. Let's move on to the next one. The Saints take on the Rams in LA, and the obvious starts in this game are all on the Rams side of the ball. Puka should be back this week, so 100% you are starting Puka Nacua. Don't get cute. You're also going to start Devontae Adams with confidence. That's a no-brainer. Definitely starting Devontae Adams. And given I would expect a touchdown for both of them, I trust Stafford to be throwing multiple touchdowns every week. So I would be starting Stafford. The matchup is neutral for him, and odds are he's a top 15 quarterback every week. So definitely going to be in my lineup if I have him. I trust Stafford from a floor standpoint. The upside is also tremendous. He had 5 touchdowns, even without Puka, last we saw him. Kyren Williams, also a must start, definitely keeping him in the lineup, automatically starting Kyren Williams. And then the Rams defense, I think, is a no-brainer given the Saints offense is opposite them. The Saints are always a good matchup, and they're starting their backup quarterback, the rookie Tyler Shuck, will replace Spencer Rattler. So they're going to see what they have in him, but honestly, I don't see it's much of a difference. I think the Rams are a lock in the lineup. If you have them, definitely start them, but maybe they're available on the wire. They may have been dropped during their bye week. Lastly, though, the only other player I'm starting would be Chris Olave, and the volume is safe enough, but the quarterback change could be a red flag. I could see a world where Olave's not as good with Tyler Shuck, but he wasn't amazing with Rattler as just a safe floor bet. The volume is so reliable. I would still trust Olave. The matchup is good. The Rams did trade for a corner, but on the year they've been a top 12 spot here, so I would still consider Olave a safe start. Gonna rank him top 25 for sure this week. At flex, I'm realizing I have the wrong graphic up. I did change this one. And as you can see, Alvin Kamara is actually a player I would be benching vehemently this week. I noticed the matchup after I put him in the flex conversation and then forgot to change it. This is the accurate one. Definitely bench Alvin Kamara. The Rams matchup is bottom 2 against running backs. So not expecting a touchdown ever from Kamara. With the quarterback change, it should be even more brutal for him. But perhaps he gets a bunch of checkdowns with the backup quarterback. It is possible that his role does change in the passing game, but not going to trust him. The matchup is just so bad against the Rams. Have no desire to press my luck. The only New Orleans Saint I would consider flexing would be Rashid Shaheed, and it's only for upside purposes. The Rams secondary is not good, so I could see a deep shot touchdown, but given you have to trust Tyler Shuck sight unseen, it feels very, very rough to know what you're going to get. So maybe it works out. Maybe Shaheed is now Shuck's new favorite target, but odds are it's not worth it. Odds are I don't want to be starting Rashid Shaheed, but does have upside. If you get 15 points from him, it wouldn't be that surprising. He does have very high upside down the field. Every other player, though, I'm benching, like Blake Corum. Not going to trust him behind Kyron Williams. His role has been very inconsistent, and the fumbles are a problem. Tyler Higbee, also not a safe bet. I don't trust him enough. And then, interestingly enough, Jordan Whittington is kind of tempting because Tutu Atwell was placed on IR. But if you told me all that value went to Konata Mumfield, I also wouldn't be shocked. Mumfield scored a touchdown in London and does run a few more routes outside compared to Whittington. Atwell does not run in the slot, so Mumfield is probably the next man up behind Atwell. But in general, that's not a valuable role to have. Atwell was only viable if he had like a 70-yard reception for a touchdown. So I'm not dying to start Konata Mumfield. I don't see it's worth it. And then because the quarterback is changing, I don't think the role for Juwan Johnson is going to increase. Juwan had great chemistry with Rattler, and his role had already been falling down. So I don't feel confident in Juwan with Tyler Shuck. No, thank you. The Rams offense is elite, so definitely not trusting the Saints defense. That's fucking stupid. But as always, my long shot for the Saints is going to be Taysom Hill. I think at some point his breakout game is coming, and you know at some point he will give you like a 30-point game. But to know when it's coming is a big lie. I have no idea when it'll happen. I'm just going to put him here in the long shot category until it happens, and then everyone will roster him, and then watch, he'll do nothing. He'll be very annoying, but for now, he's in the long shot category. His upside is elite. We all know that. But my long shot for the Rams would be rookie tight end Terrence Ferguson. Off the bye, rookies sometimes emerge a lot more, and we did see a touchdown for him back in London. He did step up for the first time in his career. So I'm hopeful for him, but it's really just my bias speaking. I drafted him a lot on Underdog this summer, and it has not panned out. So I'm hopeful, but honestly, the more likely candidate here would be Konata Mumfield. I feel like that's probably more likely to work out for a touchdown. That's it for Rams Saints. Let's move on to Chiefs at Bills. And this is the game of the week. Definitely trying to start some players with some high upside. I think the quarterbacks are no-brainers. If you have Mahomes, who's been the QB1, no chance you're benching him. And then Josh Allen, also not a chance you're benching him. So don't get cute. This game is probably a shootout, so expecting a high ceiling for both. And then you're always starting James Cook with a lot of confidence. No doubt you're benching James Cook. You're also not benching Rashee Rice at this point. He looks amazing, and in this offense, he's clearly the number one go-to option. So touchdown feels guaranteed. He almost had a second touchdown last week. He was tackled at the 1 on 2 plays. So Rashee Rice, a hyper safe option. Looks like Mahomes' favorite target. I also think I'm going to start Travis Kelce, but honestly, the matchup is really bad. Based on the stats, you should be fading Travis Kelce, but in primetime games, he usually steps up, and although this game is on Sunday, it's in the afternoon window, and I can't imagine any other game is more appealing than this one. So I would expect a ton of viewership here. It's essentially a primetime matchup on Sunday afternoon, and I would definitely start Kelce if I can. Last week with 99 yards and touchdown, still a really good option. Definitely not washed, even though he's 36 years old. I would still start Travis Kelce. But in the flex, the upside for Xavier Worthy is still there, so not a terrible option. Still going to trust him as a solid flex play, but is a big liability. Every receiver not named Rashee Rice can absolutely burn you in the Chiefs offense, but my preference is definitely Xavier Worthy if it's not Rashee Rice. The matchup for running backs, though, is really good. The Bills rank top 5. So Isaiah Pacheco, I think, is the guy you want. Definitely some upside for him in this spot, but really hard to trust. Last week, he got vultured twice by Kareem Hunt. So that is the role for Kareem Hunt. On the goal line, in close, he will punch it in, and that's going to be very annoying. It's kind of a 3-headed backfield, and at the moment, it looks like Pacheco is the main guy, but Kareem Hunt still has that touchdown viability, does have the highest ceiling for that reason. So Kareem Hunt, no floor, but high ceiling. Last week, 2 touchdowns. It probably evaporates, though. But he is in the flex conversation because the matchup is top 5. Dalton Kincaid, though, is only a flex play. In general, I would be starting him confidently, but the matchup against Kansas City is bottom 4, so that could be a big problem. I could see Dalton Kincaid play very poorly. However, Khalil Shakir is probably the safer wide receiver to bet on in Buffalo, but the Chiefs have very good corners, especially Trent McDuffie could easily lock him down. I could see Shakir absolutely burn you. It's not a good spot whatsoever. So just a flex play, but in general, the floor is pretty safe for Shakir. I think he's probably still in the flex conversation, but not an automatic start. After a good game, I wouldn't trust the upside to be a guarantee for Khalil Shakir. However, for the Chiefs wide receiver core, if it's not Rashee Rice, I barely trust Worthy, so I'm not going to trust Hollywood Brown. He had a bagel last week off 2 touchdowns. It really let you down. And then Tyquan Thornton can still pop off at random times, but not going to trust him, similar to Hollywood, way too risky. And same goes with Juju. One of these guys will play well, but to know who it is a major lie. And it's just lucky if you pick the right one. I'm going to be fading all 3. Not going to start them. That's for sure. But in the Bills offense, Josh Palmer is banged up and has done nothing. So definitely benching him. Could score, but definitely a fluke if it happens. Dawson Knox, only interested in him if Kincaid is inactive, but he played last week. So not expecting Knox to be the guy. And then Keon Coleman is so up and down, so hard to trust. In a rough matchup like this, I'm not going to trust Keon Coleman against the Chiefs. Really bad matchup for Keon. I also see a bit of a shootout, so not going to trust the Chiefs or the Bills defense. Neither is appealing. If I had to start one, it would be Kansas City, but against Josh Allen, no thank you. I expect a 30-point shootout from both teams. But my long shots in this game are kind of the same as last week. We have Brashard Smith at running back, and last week was just a Kareem Hunt game, but it could definitely pivot back in favor of Brashard. And then Ray Davis got a little more volume last week, but really hard to trust, really touchdown dependent, and I would rather not bet on him if I can avoid it. Feels way too risky. So no thanks with him. The volume is low, but I think worth a roster spot. Good handcuff behind James Cook. That's it for this matchup. Let's move on to the next one, where the Seahawks travel to Washington to take on the Commanders in primetime. Sunday Night Football. I do assume Jaden Daniels will play, so if he does, obviously a lock in the lineup. The matchup isn't good for him, but it's not bad enough where I'm dying to bench him. Jaden Daniels with a lot of rushing upside is always a safe play. So definitely going to start Jaden. I think off the injury, it's not ideal, but still worth a start. And he's the only Commander I would start with confidence, because while I want to put Terry in the lineup, I don't like this matchup on paper. It does rank as a neutral spot, but they've been injured on the secondary, and the game against Baker really skews these numbers, as well as when they were all banged up against Jacksonville. Brian Thomas Jr. did play well. So I actually think this Seahawks matchup is much more difficult, and I could see Reek Woolen really shut down Terry. Even Devon Witherspoon could hold his own on Terry McLaurin. So not ideal, but Terry had a touchdown, plays well historically, so is a solid flex play. And same with Deebo Samuel, not the best matchup, but probably enough volume to carry you for a safe floor. So not ideal. I'm not dying to start them, but I do think they're good flex plays in a rough matchup, though. Not their best game is what I'm expecting. On the opposite side of the ball, though, JSN is matchup proof. So even if it's a tough spot for him, I would still start JSN, but it is a good matchup, actually, top 10 against the Commanders. So 100% start JSN. He'll be top 5 in my ranks this week. And then at this point, I think Zach Charbonnet is the guy to start in the backfield. Charbonnet scoring touchdowns. Walker is not. Charbonnet still in the committee, but definitely the guy with higher upside. That's for sure. Sam Darnold, though, I think is a good start this week. The matchup against Washington does rank top 4. And even though Mahomes had 2 interceptions last week, had a great game with 3 touchdowns, I would still trust this matchup as a good one. So Darnold is the guy, has had some high upside in some games this season, and also a very safe floor. I consider him my favorite streaming option this week, and I do consider him a good start. Top 4 matchup for Darnold. I think I'll rank him top 12. But another player with a good matchup would be Zach Ertz, who goes up against the Seahawks, who gave up almost 100 yards to Dalton Schultz, and I could see a touchdown come back to Ertz with Daniels under center. But if you tell me Mariota's the guy, then 100% fade Zach Ertz. He's hyper reliant on Daniels and good matchups. But if both are there this week, it looks like that's the case, then Ertz is a legit streaming option. That's for sure. But Kenneth Walker is just a flex play, given Charbonnet's been vulturing him. He had 2 touchdowns on Walker's birthday last time, and that's a big sign that they don't feel like they owe anything to Kenneth Walker. So no thanks. If I can avoid it, for sure, I will be benching Walker, but odds are you'll still keep him as a flex option. The floor is still safe for like 60, 70 yards. He's still productive, but not getting the valuable goal line touches that you need. So capped upside, but a decent floor play. Walker is just a flex option rest of the season. But in a good matchup, I don't want to dismiss AJ Barner, who's had some really good games this season. And because I'm willing to start Sam Darnold, it's not just going to be JSN that contributes. So I think AJ Barner has a good game. The matchup for him is top 7. And given his upside this year, I do consider him a legit streaming option this week. If you wanted to pick him up and play him, I wouldn't be opposed to do that. I like the matchup. I like AJ Barner. From a floor ceiling standpoint, he's not bad. Not bad at all. But the matchup is good for Cooper Kupp, so I could see Kupp offer some decent floor production as well. The volume should be there for at least like 5 targets. Kupp has had a decent floor at times, but other times it's completely gone away from him. He has like boom bust value. This week I don't think it's bad against the Commanders. But honestly, I think my long shot Torrey Horton is actually a little bit more interesting. I actually think Torrey Horton might be more valuable than Cooper Kupp rest of season. Off the bye, though, I don't know exactly if his role is going to expand, so he's still a hard player to fully bet on. He is a rookie after all. It's possible he plays well, but it's just not a guarantee at all. So hoping for a touchdown. The matchup is good, but I could see you get burned. It hasn't quite been there from a volume standpoint. Even when he does score a touchdown, he rarely goes over 30 yards receiving. So not the safest bet, but could give you 10 points if he does find the end zone. And then lastly, I do think the Seahawks defense is still talented enough where I'm probably going to start them at worst as a streaming option. But the Commanders offense does scare me a little bit, so odds are I'm not dying to do it. They're definitely not top 10, but definitely inside my top 16 based on their talent. I don't want to fade them too much. But players I'm benching definitely include the running backs. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt has kind of lost any safety level. It's a big committee still, even without Eckler or Brian Robinson. So JCM had a really rough game last week. The matchup here is not good against Seattle, and they're much more vulnerable against running backs who catch passes. That's not really JCM's calling card so far. So JCM, I would keep on the bench. The floor feels kind of non-existent this week. And then the backup receivers, Luke McCaffrey, Chris Moore, and Jalen Lane, definitely too risky now that Debo and Terry are back on the field. But I do consider Elijah Arroyo kind of interesting. The matchup's good for tight end, but AJ Barner has been much safer, so I'd rather bench Elijah Arroyo. And then if Mariota's the quarterback, then maybe he's an interesting flex option, but I do assume Daniels will play, so at the moment I'm not dying to roster Mariota. The Commanders defense hasn't been good this season, so against the Seahawks offense, I would rather bet on Darnold than the Commanders defense. No thank you with Washington in my lineup. However, their long shot would be the running back who popped off for a lot of receiving yards last week. I do consider Jeremy McNichols this week's long shot for Washington. There is still some upside in this backfield, but it's a big split between him and JCM. McNichols might be the guy because he catches passes, and the Seahawks are vulnerable in that category. But in general, I'm not starting him. Definitely not dying to do it. The last matchup on the week on Monday night is possibly one of the biggest shootouts we get this week. And despite a bad matchup for Dak Prescott, I don't care. I'm still going to start Dak. It's not as scary as the Broncos, and I do expect him to bounce back, especially at home. Dak plays much better. So although the Cardinals are coming off a bye, I don't really care about this downgrade. Definitely start Dak Prescott. I think he'll look more like the MVP candidate we remember than what he looked like last week. He's not getting benched for Joe Milton in this game, but obviously start CeeDee Lamb. That's always a no-brainer. He's a top 3 wide receiver at the worst. And then Jake Ferguson, despite a bagel last week, should bounce back. The matchup against Arizona does rank top 5. So although last week's matchup was also somewhat solid, it definitely wasn't this good, and I can't imagine he puts up another bagel after a big disappointing game. So Ferguson in a good spot. I think we'll find the end zone. Definitely a must start in my opinion. And then at this point, Javonte Williams is such a reliable play. 2 touchdowns last week, even though he was bad efficiency-wise, was a great start in fantasy. So got to start him against Arizona. That's also a plus matchup. 13th ranks as a neutral above average matchup. And then George Pickens, I think, is at this point a lock in the lineup. I can't really think of an argument to be benching George Pickens. So not even going to put him in the flex conversation. Definitely a must start in my estimation, and all of those Cowboys options should be in the lineup. But for Arizona, it's very straightforward. We always know that we're starting Trey McBride. The matchup for him isn't amazing, but he's clearly the go-to target for Arizona, so always a must start. And then the matchup for Marvin Harrison Jr. is fantastic. On the year, ranks as the best matchup overall. However, in the last 4 games, they have been getting closer to league average. But I still trust receivers against Dallas, similar to Troy Franklin. I could see Marvin Harrison Jr. offer 2 touchdowns, but definitely starting him, that's for sure. And then this might shock you, but I am telling you to start Bam Knight against Dallas. They are a very good matchup in the last 4 games, the best for running backs overall. And then on the season, they still rank top 3 as well. So Bam Knight should play very well. And the reason he's a start and not a flex is because I don't know what the fuck is going on with Michael Carter. Michael Carter, I think you have to bench because they let him go. He was released by the team over the bye, and then they added him to the practice squad. I have no confidence he's going to be playing. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think Carter is involved in their offense at all. And next week, not this week, but in week 10, it's also likely that Trey Benson will come back. So I guess they don't like him. I guess they would rather go Emari Demercado. And that's why Demercado is my long shot. It feels gross. I'm not going to start him. But because Michael Carter is on the practice squad, was released by the team over the bye, and Demercado's still on the roster, the matchup is so good, it might not all go to Bam Knight. I could see some upside for Demercado. But maybe he has a house call and fumbles into the goal line again. I doubt it, but it is possible. And he is my long shot with some upside for Arizona. But I'm not starting their defense, that's for sure. I'm not starting Michael Wilson. He always sucks. And then Zay Jones only has value with Jacoby Brissett. And I'm not sure who the quarterback is, so definitely going to bench Zay Jones. That's for sure. But the Cowboys defense sucks, so definitely benching them. Jalen Tolbert needs a house call touchdown and not going to trust that to happen again. So definitely benching him. And then Jaden Blue getting like 5-6 touches a game. Not enough to trust, but is the handcuff at the moment to Javonte. So those are all the players I'm benching. And then lastly, I want to bring up the Arizona quarterback. I think it's going to be Jacoby Brissett. I think regardless of who it is, they are a solid streaming option in Superflex formats. I would consider Jacoby to get a big upgrade this week, but I'm not sure if off the bye, Kyler Murray will return. If he does, I think he has higher upside for sure. But on the year, it's been capped. So I don't think he's a must start, even though the matchup is elite. The best matchup for quarterbacks is Dallas. So I kind of want to tell you to start him, but I don't know how healthy he is. And he's also been terrible this year. So not dying to do it. I honestly think Jacoby Brissett might have more upside, keep the offense a little bit more consistent, moving the chains. So I think both of them are worth a start in a 2 quarterback league, but in 1 quarterback settings, it's hard to actually fit them in. So odds are you won't do it, but it could be a good option off the wire if you have to replace someone like Baker or Jalen Hurts. So that is it for this video. I am done. So before I leave you, don't pin me down on every single take in this video. Until I do the rankings and get all the injury updates, I don't know for sure if I'm going to start them confidently, but I am definitely inclined to do that with the players I mentioned. I would stick with most of these takes over the course of the week, but some of them will change. Anyway, that's it for me. My name's Adam Riancho. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.